I mean, Islam, it has a very simple theology that anybody can understand. In Surah Al-Ikhlas, the chapter that says, say God is unique, God is completely independent, God neither gives birth nor was God born, and there's nothing like God. Well, consciousness also for us is a spiritual phenomenon. It's not a material phenomenon. And the ancients said that the one who denies the soul, that you'd have to determine him an idiot. They really saw it as a kind of absurdity to deny the existence of a soul, because it's so clear, if anybody's ever seen a corpse, that something's very profoundly missing.
So let's go back to practicalities with regards to Islam. And also I'd be interested in what following the Islamic faith has done for your life personally. How has it helped you put yourself together? And also I'm interested in, again, why you found the Islamic tradition preferable, let's say, to the Orthodox tradition, that you did enjoy the rituals that were part of that, at least. So let's deal with practical issues first.
In terms of why I chose Islam, I mean, I'm not completely convinced that I chose Islam. I mean, in some ways, Islam chose me as well. So it's, guidance is a very strange thing for people. Like, I saw an inevitability. When I look back on what happened, I saw an inevitability of my embracing Islam. I had some very interesting experiences that could be termed mystical, or however you want to determine them. But the tradition itself, what struck me was, one, I got to keep all of the prophets that I believed in already, and I added, in addition, what we consider to be the final prophet. And just as very often Christians marvel at how Jews miss Jesus, Muslims also marvel at how Christians and Jews miss Muhammad. Although, to be fair to the Jews, they do acknowledge the prophet as a providential force, and they do acknowledge him as a Noahidic messenger preparing the way for the coming of the Messiah. So they do recognize that he was a providential force. At least if you read George Kohler's book on Jewish theology, as a chapter on Judaism and Islam. And certainly the great father of Orientalism, Ignaz Goldziher, he actually said that he felt that Islam was the only religion that somebody of a philosophical bent could actually accept. And he wanted to really bring in the gift of philosophy into Judaism that the Muslims had so richly participated in. In fact, there's an argument that just as Judaism prepared the way for Christianity, it was Islam that prepared the way for a philosophical Western Christendom. Because if you look at the transmission of all of that knowledge that comes into Europe, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas, who's 13th century, he dies in 1274, and yet he's the doctor of the church. Just look at the number of times he quotes Muslims. I mean, he calls Averroes the commentator. So I think Islam, one of the beauties of the religion to me is that you'll find whatever you're looking for in it. I mean, Islam, it has a very simple theology that anybody can understand. In Surah Al-Ikhlas, the chapter that says, say God is unique, God is completely independent, God neither gives birth nor was God born, and there's nothing like God. So within the Islamic tradition, there's just an extraordinary spectrum. You can spend your entire life and have a satisfying life, and I know people that have done this, just mastering the recensions of the Quran and the qira'at, the actual oral expression of the Quran through the rules of tajweed. You can spend your life studying exegesis. You can spend your life studying prophetic tradition. You can spend your life studying the great mystics of Islam. We have the best poets in the world. We also have the best architecture. I mean, there's nothing like the Taj Mahal or the Alhambra Palace. And even Western architecture, if you read Stealing from the Saracens, she shows how some of the finest Western architecture was basically taken from the Islamic civilization, including Notre Dame in Paris. I know people that just came to Islam through music. I mean, I know some really professional musicians that fell in love with Arabic music, which led them into Muslim culture, people that love. I mean, one of the most interesting things about Islam is it is a truly universal religion in that you can go from Indonesia to California and find all of these different expressions of the same central truths of Islam with their own local colorings. So the West African Muslims are not like the Middle Eastern Muslims. The Middle Eastern Muslims are not like the Indian Muslims. And you have people like, one of the great Impressionist painters of Sweden. I think he's actually considered a national treasure in Sweden, but his paintings hang in the museum there. He became Muslim in jail for actually, he shot a matador because he was raised by, his father was a veterinarian, and he shot a matador because he was so horrified that they were bringing bullfighting into France. And there was such an uproar that they actually released him. But when he was in jail, he befriended an Algerian who used to recite Quran all the time. And he ended up becoming Muslim and then studying in Egypt and then going back to his native land. He died in Spain, but extraordinary individual. So you have people like that. You have people that anybody can find what they're looking for. And that is the power of the faith, I think, is that it is truly a universal faith. And I think one of the things that Western people tend to do, one, they don't recognize that it's a Western faith because it is. It's part of the Abrahamic faith. It was in Spain for centuries. It's been in Eastern Europe for centuries. And even Istanbul, which is the great capital of Islam for centuries, is half in Europe and half in the East. And that's why it really bridges these two worlds. And so there's so much,
this is part of the reason why I think it makes sense for religious people, Christians, Jews, and Islamic alike, to focus on their commonalities in the face of the things that are disintegrating our cultures. We could start by trying to make some peace between us if we're going to consort ourselves reasonably as religious individuals.
And I commend you for trying to do some bridge building because, arguably, there's been so much negativity around this faith and around its adherents that there's an almost instantaneous association with the most negative aspects of humanity with the religion. And it's quite tragic. And so just as an exercise, a kind of bracketing for a second and try to think about things, a mentor of mine and a friend of mine, Dr. Thomas Cleary, wrote a book called Zen Koans. He also translated the Quran. He's one of the brilliant translators of our lifetime. But he wrote a book called Zen Koans. And in the introduction of that book, he actually says the purpose of a koan is to snap people out of sloppy thinking. I think I read that book. But he says in there, but you don't need a koan to do that. Just ask an educated Western person what they think about Islam, and they'll start expressing all of these prejudices. And if you ask them, have you ever read the Quran? No. Do you know anything about the Prophet Muhammad? No. Other than maybe something they read in a newspaper article or in Time or Newsweek or the Atlantic Monthly.
Yeah, well, it's not an easy thing to try to get a toehold in a different tradition, especially when you don't even have a toehold in your own.
Yeah, it's not that hard, especially for an educated person. You're obviously a highly educated person. It's not that hard. Islam, one of the things Gibbon said is that Islam spread because it was a very easy religion to understand. So this idea that I can't understand it, I'm having a hard time, it's not that hard to understand. Islam is actually very straightforward.